Hello everybody and welcome to the first installment of this two-part webinar on Kitto, a Delphi-based tool for creating business-oriented web applications that leverage XJS version 6 for the client-side GUI. I am Nando De Sena. I am the creator and main developer of Kitto, and in the next 40 minutes or so I will get you through the basics and show you the main characteristics of this tool. I have been using Delphi since it was first introduced back in 1995, I believe, and in my defense I would say that I was very young at the time. My computer-related career revolves around Delphi. I have been and still am a developer, author, speaker and consultant for the past 20 years. I also work in other languages such as C++, JavaScript and Solidity. I have worked in various capacities on open source projects such as Instant Objects, Firebird and Flame Robin. As I said before, I am the creator of Kitto and Kitto 2, which is the new version we'll be looking at today. To give a wider picture, I've been a theater actor and not anymore, and I currently spend some time in the cryptocurrency world, so you're only going to find me here answering questions until I become outrageously rich. Now a few words about Ethia, thanks to which the development of Kitto has reached the current stage. Ethia is a Delphi-based development and consultancy company and also the main user of Kitto. The company has been active as a sponsor and presenter at Delphi events for more than 10 years and has sponsored much of Kitto and Kitto 2 development work. In the past, Ethia has created other development tools such as Instant Solutions and Instant BD Express. For more information, please see their website at www.ethia.it. So let's start with today's agenda. We are going to learn what actually Kitto is and what its purpose is, and then we'll jump into a simple demo that will help me explain to you the basic building blocks of a Kitto application. Then a bit more details about YAML files, which form the declarative part of an application, JavaScript code generation, models and relationships, views and controllers. After that, we will be ready for a slightly more complex example which shows several types of controllers at work. Controllers in Kitto are roughly equivalent to data-aware visual components, some of them more high-level than others. Next step is a tool we called KID, which is basically an integrated development environment for Kitto applications. I'm going to use it to show you the demos, and then I'll show it to you in a bit more detail. Finally, a list of advanced features which we will talk about next week in a follow-up webinar, which you can subscribe to already if you dare, and a different list of things we don't have in Kitto yet, but we plan to do sooner rather than later. Let's start then. Okay, in brief, Kitto is a tool for rapid development and maintenance of data-oriented rich internet applications. Kitto supports many different databases through FireDAC, DB Express, ADO. Kitto has a system of pluggable modules for database and data access library support, which can be combined, meaning you can connect to an interbase database, for example, either through DB Express or FireDAC, depending on which Delphi version and platform you are using. Knowledge of the type of database allows Kitto to tailor SQL code generation, among other things. Yeah, because I haven't said that yet, Kitto generates SQL statements for data retrieval and update for you. You don't have to worry about that unless you want to. In order to build our GUI, we can choose among a rich set of controllers mapped onto XJS's components. We have trees, various kinds of grids, pull down and tree menus, charts, panels, template views, tabs, accordions, and so on. The version of XJS used by Kitto 2 is the 6.x line, which is the latest available. This is worth mentioning because the switch from earlier versions is not at all easy. For completeness, I'll add that Kitto is currently using XJS's classic toolkit. We plan to switch to the modern toolkit, which has better touch support sometime in the future. I have said that with Kitto you don't need to write SQL code and you don't need to write JavaScript code either. an engine will generate code and send it to the browser for execution. This includes creation of objects and components, asynchronous calls and event handlers, data retrieval in JSON format. You can still write JavaScript code if you need extreme customization, which Kitto allows. What you will write more often is Delphi code instead. In a Kitto application, you write Delphi code on the back end for business rows and custom features. You can go as far as creating entirely new controllers or integrate other JavaScript libraries if you so wish. We support all newer Delphi versions, let's say since Delphi XE8 in Win32 and Win64 platforms. Linux 64 is in the works. All code, including the IDE, is released under the Apache license 2.0, and you can clone our GitHub repository and start working with Kitto right away, possibly send a pull request if you happen to fix a bug or enhance something. Don't forget to have a look at the blog and, more importantly, the wiki pages, which represent the bulk of Kitto's documentation. You will find lots of information that I am not going to be able to give you in the limited time I have for these webinars. Time to look at a simple example. This one is a pretty rough application based on the employee interbase and Firebird example database. Okay. Let's open the project in the KIDE. There we go. In the left review, you can see the project files. Now, if we run the application and navigate to it in the browser, we are prompted with a standard login dialog and then the main application menu. It is worth noting at this point that Kitto applications are single-page applications, meaning that everything happens inside the same HTML page and the user never navigates away from it. On the left and top, we can see two different representations of the application's main menu. One as a tree and one as a toolbar with pull-down menus. This is a case of two controllers rendering the same view in two different ways, as we will see later. Okay, this one is a simple list of records with standard editing commands such as new, modify, and delete. Whereas this other one is a slightly richer view, including a filter box at the top and an additional command to download displayed records as an Excel spreadsheet. These commands in Kitto are a special kind of controllers called tool controllers. Let's just save the file and open it. The spreadsheet is produced by merging the data into a programmer-provided template, which is the job of the Excel tool controller. Okay. The employees view is mapped on a model marked as large, which means that the view uses paging and by default doesn't fetch any records in advance. You can see the paging controls at the bottom, which are displayed automatically for large tables. The filter box at the top features both a free search and a lookup search. The lookup search opens the same jobs view we have seen before, but now as a model selection window, which we can use to filter the record set. We can modify a record by selecting it and opening the standard edit form. This is how fields are arranged by default in a form. We will see how to customize that when we talk about layouts. As you can see, Kitto uses different controls for different data types. And finally, this close session command is an example of a predefined tool controller which you can add to a menu in order to provide some standard functionality. Okay, in this case, the user session is closed, and we are back to the login screen. This simple application was basically created with Kitto and did not require much development. We just created the skeleton automatically and added a few features here and there, such as the filter boxes and download tools. Other than that and other small customizations, this is pretty much what you get by running your database through Kitto. As you can see, the application could use some more customizations, but as a first demo, I am just going to leave it like it is. Now that we have seen the first demo, let's talk about the architecture of a Kitto application. Kitto features a declarative application engine based on metadata. This means that most things you want Kitto to do, you express them in a declarative way inside a YAML file. A Kitto application is made up of a Delphi project, a set of metadata files, and a set of resources. Most of a Kitto application lies in the metadata files. All metadata files are in YAML format. YAML is a human-readable markup language which is easier to read and less noisy and error-prone to write than XML or JSON, meaning that you can just open and edit the files in your preferred text editor. Just remember, a YAML file is a tree of nodes, each on its own text line with a name followed by a column followed by a value. Let's see an example here. Valid data types for values include numbers, strings, dates, but also space-separated lists and special values or macros. Multi-line values are supported as well. Indentation in YAML is paramount to define structure. Kitto by convention uses 2 spaces for each level of indentation. Don't use tabs, only spaces. Kitto refuses to parse files containing tabs and tells you so. A YAML file is much like a JSON file, only more compact and readable. Okay, models map database tables and views, and also stored procedures if you dare. You create a model file for each database table you want to use, or let Kitto create default model files for you. We have seen an example of a model in the previous demo application. Views, the data views in particular, transform data for presentation and add display properties, validation rules, commands, and tools. We have seen a basic example before, and I'm going to show you more complex example later. Here is the jobs view we have seen before. You can see a few display properties, the declaration of the filters, the list of fields, and the definition of the download tool. Okay. Then we have layouts, which define how a set of fields looks on an edit form or panel. You use layouts to create complex data entry forms. Then what about resources? Resources are just additional files that your application will need to send to the web browser, such as images and JavaScript files or cascading style sheet files. The config file is called config.yaml by default, and it is one mandatory file in a Kitto application. Think of it as the main entry point. Normally, the config file mentions a home view from which the entire application is served. The config file contains settings regarding database connections, language and localization, user authentication, access control, and so on. You can have several config files for a single application, but you use them one at a time. Let's see an example of a moderately complex config file. This is the config file page from the Kitto wiki. You can see a list of first level config nodes which define various characteristics of the application. And there is the config file from one of our example applications. You can see that it's a YAML file, that it's indented. This connection string is an example of a multi-line value using some macros which are expanded by Kitto at runtime. And this is the home view definition. Okay, the main view is usually some kind of menu that opens other views, but it can be anything really. Then you have Delphi classes. It's a Delphi application after all. Delphi classes are controllers which define a means to render a view and generate the client-side JavaScript code. Then we have server-side rules, which are pieces of Delphi code triggered at various times to enforce business rules, mainly during data editing. You can have tools, which are a special kind of controller similar to a Delphi action. You can have macro expanders, which allow you to customize the contents of YAML files dynamically based on Delphi code you write. And finally, you can have custom model implementation, which completely abstract the database input-output. You can have models which are not actually based on database tables. This is an advanced feature we won't be looking at today. We will now have a closer look at all these elements. This picture is a high-level representation of the architecture of a Kitto application. Orange boxes are parts inside the Delphi application. Green boxes represent the parts that run inside the web browser. If we zoom in, we can see where each piece fits in. Let's move to the Kitto wiki. In this second diagram, all blue blocks are inside the Kitto application itself, while other blocks are out-of-process or network-connected objects. The architecture is layered. From top to bottom, we have the controllers, which represent the GUI, layered on top of the storage module, responsible for data input and output, the metadata catalog, which is a collection of YAML files containing the instructions about how to build the GUI and how to access the data, and the resources, images, styles, config files, and so on. Further down, we find layers providing fundamental application services such as authentication and access control, localization, macro expansion, and any custom service you might want to integrate or implement in your application. Database adapters abstract the database types and data access libraries to use. You can use as many of them as you need in a single application. Currently, Kitto uses dxgetText as the preferred localization engine, with some enhancements to support localization of YAML files, but it is possible to plug in other mechanisms if required. Finally, there's the web subsystem, which does mainly two things. It leverages the web broker and indie technologies to provide a web server, engine, session, and cookie manager on top of which the Kitto application runs, and it generates the JavaScript code and JSON streams that constitute the client-side part of the application. This slide contains a roundup of what's what in Kitto. The Kitto wiki contains detailed information and examples of all that. Plus, all the code is documented in XML doc format so that you can see documentation while you code in the Delphi editor. Let's have a look at models, views, and some controllers now. Back to the Kitto wiki. As we have seen, models in Kitto are roughly equivalent to a database table. Here is an example of a model mapped onto the database table called party. We have the party ID, which is a primary key field that is not visible in the GUI and which has a default value auto-computed by the application through this macro. This macro generates a compact GUID, that is a GUID string without the hyphens and the brackets. Then we have a party name which has a hint. Hints are displayed in the data entry fields in Kitto's forms, and rules which force camel capitalization. This is a client-side rule, which means that Kitto will generate JavaScript code to enforce this particular rule, which is registered by name in Kitto's rule registry. Then we have a date. This is a particular type of macro which is expanded in JavaScript as the current date. The party time, the address where the party will be held, and the party period, which is an expression field. This means that the field is not physically contained in the table, but is calculated as a SQL expression which is specified here. These macros with a db prefix that you can see in the field expression are macros that are expanded differently depending on the actual database to which we are connected at runtime, because the syntax for different databases may be different. Models can also have references to other models and detail references which are used by Kitto to provide support for master detailed structures. Let's talk now about views, which are user interface elements. A view in Kitto might be a page or a panel, a tabbed panel, a tree, a toolbar, a list or a grid panel, and so on. When a view is linked to underlying data from the database, it is a data view, which is a particular kind of view. A view is usually defined in its own YAML file, but you can define very simple views inline in other YAML files. This is an example of an inline view, a simple, actually the simplest possible home view, which references a viewport controller and an HTML panel. Viewport controllers are first-level controllers, and Kitto needs one first-level controller at least for the home view. And the first-level controller can be a viewport, which occupies the entire workspace of the browser page, or a window which occupies a defined portion of it. Then we have the view builder, but this is an advanced topic which I will be covering in the next webinar. Let's see a data view, which is an interesting type of view. A data view, which is defined by its type data, is a special kind of view that is data bound, which means it is linked to one or more models. The structure of a data view is as follows. Usually the data view embeds a main table, which is a view table object. View table objects are what links data views to models. So you can specify which model to reference and the list of fields. You can also override field properties at this level. Any field property in Kitto is overridable at the view level. Okay, among the typical properties of a view table, we have the display label, both singular and plural, read-only flags, list of fields, also reference fields, optional filters, in case you want to filter the records in a data view in a different way than the records in the model, and a subnode called controller, which contains all controller related properties. Once you have defined a data view, you can render it in different ways using different controllers. For example, we can see the grid panel controller. The grid panel controller renders a data view as a database grid. So you have fields and columns. You have a layout which helps you define the order of fields and other properties. You can have grouping. We will see a grouped grid in the following example. And you can have other properties that customize the grid appearance. There's more to customize than I can show you right now, but you can have colored cells, you can have customized tooltips, you can have inline editing and other features. Among the other controllers which are documented in our wiki, we can see, for example, the form controller. Form controller displays one record at a time, and it's also used for editing data. As such, the form holds the list of editors which are defined by Kitto based on the underlying field data types. A form can have a layout, which is another type of metadata objects defining how a group of fields is represented inside a form. You can put fields in different tabs, in different groups. You can put two fields in a row. You can define the width of a field, which is different than the physical field width inherited from the view table. And you can set other properties which customize the display of fields. Here is an example of a very simple layout. You have one field, then you have a row with two fields, and then you have a third field which is specified with in characters. This is the result rendered on the web page. Another example which uses a field set. So you have one field set, which is a group field containing a row with 4 fields inside it. Another field set with 5 fields inside it. A field set is rendered as a bordered box, which is also collapsible. There are lots of controllers in Kitto. You can also customize them in Delphi code, or you can define your own controllers. Please have a look at the wiki for documentation about the other controllers. We are now going to see some of them in action in a slightly more polished example. Hello Kitto is a dull database application that showcases a few nice features in the simplest possible way. Let's have a look. This application does not use authentication, so it's basically a single user application. Upon startup, we have 2 views auto-opened on the home view, which is a tab panel. You can easily declare which views to auto-open, if any, in the tab panel-based views YAML definition. The Girls view has a type of filter we haven't seen before. It's a button list filter. Each button applies a configured SQL filter expression to the displayed dataset. And filters are combined by means of an OR connector in this case. Another feature of this grid panel is in-place editing, which is useful in simple cases because you don't need to create an edit form in order to modify a value. When clicking on an editable cell, an editor whose type depends on the field's data type is created. When you're done, you save or cancel all edits at the same time. Another feature is grid line coloring, which in this case is also paired with the legend here on the right. Let's have a look. This is one case in which you can write JavaScript code to customize the rendering of the data. This row class provider is an anonymous JavaScript function that is called for each displayed record. It has the data record as an input argument and returns the CSS class to be used to render the data. Since we don't want to pollute the YAML file with the JavaScript code, which would also be difficult to maintain, we just call a separate function that we have coded in the application.js file, which we can find in the resources section. Here. This is the called function. The CSS classes are defined in the companion application.css file. These files are automatically included in the Kitto application page if present. There are ways to define other JS and CSS files to include as needed. What about the legend? We have defined it in plain HTML in the east view of the grid panel by means of an HTML panel controller. Here is the code. All panel-based controllers in Kitto use a border layout, so you can recursively lay them inside one another in north, south, west, east and center regions. This allows for maximum flexibility in laying out things. Row class provider on HTML panel are just two examples of techniques you can use to customize your Kitto application to the bone. There are endless customization possibilities through these and other techniques, which are rather advanced. In this instance, I just wanted to show you an example, but please keep in mind that you are usually not required to go bare metal in this way. In the dolls view, we have a grouping grid, which is a feature of XJS that Kitto allows you to surface by simply specifying the grouping field, in this case the hair field, in the YAML definition. Please note that you can still edit the data in a pop-up window. Kitto has built-in support for file uploading and downloading, either directly inside the blob field or outside the database, in which case it will only store the generated and the original file names in the database record and the actual data in the file system. The parties view is a master detail view in which you see a party record and a list of invitations. You can have as many detail lists as you need. You can display them in different styles, and you can have more than 2 levels as well. Changes to any record in the master detail structure are confirmed or cancelled altogether, and you can define server-side rules to be enforced at each stage of the confirmation. This application is also a demonstration of alternative home views. You can serve different home views from the same application by navigating to different URLs. In this case, we have defined the Hello World home view, which is the simplest possible view in Kitto, one that simply displays a message. The view is defined inline in the config file. And it consists of a viewport containing an HTML panel containing a small block of HTML text. You can also have automatic home view selection based on the client's capabilities, such as screen size or user agent. This allows you to serve different home views to mobile devices, for example. Here is what the Hello Kitto application looks like on a Galaxy S5 device. Please note that the menu view is still the same, but it was rendered through a different controller this time. In the desktop case, we had a toolbar on the top and a tree panel on the left. Here we have a tile panel instead. A tile panel is more suitable for touch displays. As a last example, since time is running out, I'll switch to yet another demo just to show you one view. Okay, this one is a composition of a grid panel on the right and a chart panel tied to the same data set. The chart panel uses XJS's brand new graphics package, which is wrapped by Kitto in Delphi classes. Okay, there are many other features and customization opportunities under the hood that I am not showing today and for which I suggest you subscribe to next week's webinar if you're interested. While going through the demos, we have seen Kitto pop up here and there. There are some interesting features of our IDE that I haven't been able to show you but are worth mentioning. Kitto allows you to quickly bootstrap an application by creating template-based project files for all required Delphi versions, which automatically include all units needed for the features you select and only those units. Then you can create the model YAML files automatically by querying the database metadata and also create basic views automatically from said models. You will generally use Kitto's YAML editor and the GUI wizards to customize and expand the project files, but you can use an external editor if you like it better. This is a list of advanced features, most of which I will talk about in greater detail in the next webinar. We will see all things you can plug into a Kitto application to enrich and customize every aspect of it. We will see localization support for PAS and YAML files and custom model implementations which allow complete abstraction from a database. You can define model based on local files, network services, or even Delphi code. We will also look at Kitto's tool library, including upload-download file tools, FOP and report builder report creation, email through Indy, and so on, and also Kitto's mobile device support. Finally, here is a list of things we are planning to do on Kitto in the near future. We are going to add official support for Win64 and Linux 64 platforms. We will consolidate the XJS 6 version of Kitto named Kitto 2, which is a complete overhaul over the previous version. We would like to add more deployment options, switch to XJS modern framework for better mobile and touch support, apply many performance improvements we have in mind, and so on. One major undertaking, and something we are still pondering on, would be to integrate Kitto directly inside the Delphi IDE. This would enhance the workflow and possibly bring a more pleasant development experience overall. I guess that's it. I am going to be available for questions both now and later through email or other channels. Thanks for watching.